As a photographer in 2022, one that's been practicing for over 5 decades, I have a lot to be thankful for. A while back, I set up my gear in the forest to complain about some minor irritants. But later that day, as I edited the footage, all I could think about was how lucky I was to have that bit of paradise to retreat to. How precious that was. Endangered, but how lucky I was to be able to enjoy and share that place. So I've been wanting to make a video that listed some of my reasons to celebrate. Hi, Ray here. I'm glad you could join me for an epic of sorts about why I'm a lucky guy. But let me get a gripe out of the way first, if you don't mind. In that grump video, I talked about the apparent caprice of the YouTube algorithm, or whatever it is that animates this platform. I predicted that that video wasn't, quote, gonna be a hormone-boosting blockbuster, and I was right. It stalled at 199 views, despite the fact it attained the highest retention rate of any video on this channel. That means, according to YouTube's own metrics, it kept the audience's eyes on the screen for longer, percentage-wise, than anything I've ever produced. And for that, I'm grateful. What does that mean? Why didn't the algorithm promote that little gem? Isn't that one of the signals that supposedly causes the algorithm to push a video out to a wider audience? Well, I can only speculate. My guess is that my audience, my loyal fans, did care about my problems, did care about the travails of a small-time YouTuber, and watched that video right through. But alas, once that initial surge of traffic had been exhausted, the algorithm dropped my little forest communique, but onto my gratitude. I'm grateful for this platform, as fickle as it seems. The fact is that over the 13 years I've been producing content here, it's provided me with an audience for my work. It's provided me with a steady source of feedback, especially since I've accepted, well, not willingly, but my semi-retirement. It's given me a real sense of community, friends even, who've been a great source of encouragement, feedback, criticism, at least the kind that's offered gently in the interest of improving my work, not to score points. I really appreciate learning through YouTube as much as I do teaching. I absolutely love passing on what I'm learning on this journey. It's like a big co-op university. Aside from the charlatans, those demand developed critical thinking skills. Us YouTubers, and I'm perfectly happy to embrace the title. There's no shame in it, as much as some would like to cast on the job. And it is a job. Yeah, I'm proud to have been able to create this channel and my original cycling channel. So that's the sum of it as far as YouTube goes. I'm thankful for the platform itself and the amazing fellow humans, you guys, who honor me with your presence. Thank you. I'm grateful for having lived these 7 decades, somehow escaping my own indiscretions and the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Lived through this chaotic era. I was born in England a scant few years after the Second World War. I grew up amongst the aftermath of the Nazi bombing raids that rained down on the industrial Midlands. I mean, as children, we kind of turned that into play. Daredevil games in abandoned, flooded air raid shelters and flattened factories. But I think we sensed what we'd just missed. Our elders telegraphed that, not through outright scaremongering. I think they wanted to shield us from the terror that they'd endured. Keep calm and carry on was a real thing. And there were stories. The Lancaster bomber that crashed in the middle of our town, killing all on board. Luckily, no one on the ground. Like how my family spent nights huddled in the Anderson shelter at the bottom of my grandparents' garden. Everyone had one. To us kids, it might have sounded like a bit of an adventure, but there was a kind of solemn atmosphere, I think. A sense of, I guess, how uncertain the times were for our parents and grandparents, and that surviving on rations was no joke. My childhood was still, compared to the luxuries we enjoy here today, somewhat Spartan. We had no TV early on, no refrigerator. Didn't see one of those packed with exotic foods. Some I wasn't sure were edible until we reached Canada in 1965. I should say here that I still like beans on toast. We had no home phone. You had to run down to the one on the corner, drop your pennies in and dial, or actually I think it was the other way around. I have a vivid memory of being sent to do that at 10 to call the midwife when my mom went into labor with my brother. No central heating, just the fireplace and sooty coal until smokeless zones were introduced. But that's another story. Before then, there were impenetrable fogs that actually killed people, where you couldn't see your hand in front of you and your nose ran black. I don't think a lot of people, at least in the so-called first world, can fathom that kind of thing today. But I'm grateful for having the contrast. Comprehending, even at that age, sensing the tenuousness of civilization. I won't mention the Cold War and, what shall I call it, nuclear nerves. We're not out of the woods entirely in that case. I can only imagine the terrors of people who today are not so fortunate, like the people of Ukraine. Their experience is not theoretical or a memory, it's now. We can, though, through YouTube creators, visit some places that set my story in context, and me, again, as someone who has a lot to be grateful for. Which leads to my admiration for my parents who took the leap of faith, though we had family back to my great-grandfather who led the invasion, to sell up our modest household in England and move to Canada. And while still today there's things I miss about my country of birth, castles, and just generally the depth of European history and culture, Canada has given me so much. I'm eternally grateful to my late parents. Their rather brave decisions brought me to this place. I'm grateful to the English culture that made me who I am. That post-war explosion after the bombs stopped falling and the killing stopped of troubadours in tight jeans, girls in miniskirts, the music. I mean, I left England just as Beatlemania reached its screaming climax, as Carnaby Street dressed the world's youth in paisley and stripes. But I took my bell-bottoms with me, to the horror initially of my Beach Boy friends in Canadian high school. And the British music invasion followed me. It's another long story, but I can't express how thankful, how fortunate I was to have experienced, in the sense that Jimi Hendrix asked the question, that extraordinary musical era. As I've recounted in another chat, I saw so many of those musical greats in concert. Hendrix, Cream, the original Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac, the Mothers of Invention, Vanilla Fudge, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Donovan, Led Zeppelin. And I got to photograph a few. Man, I was lucky. Well, lucky that I was determined to see them anyway, and that I got experienced. When you think about it, and I'll get to photography in a moment, how much of that music could have happened without the revolution in electronics? All the genius people behind the fuzzbox, the wah-wah pedal, the mellotron, all the fantastic developments in recording equipment. Like the old cameras, they may seem primitive by today's digital recording standards, but listen to Sgt. Pepper's. So much of what we enjoy today stands on the foundations of those innovators. My entertainer dad had a few of those inventions, including a tape echo chamber. And it was a pile of those that gave Hendrix part of his signature sound, I noticed when I saw him. I was so lucky to have those wonders in my house that I could play with. I'm grateful for being exposed to North American indigenous culture, of course, particularly in Canada and more so of the Northwest Coast here. It would take a dedicated video to tell that story. But I have lived amongst, been taught by, and collaborated with some of the most talented, inspiring, and resilient people on this continent. I've been honored to meet and learn from them on remote trap lines, hunting grounds, to the hard streets of Canadian cities. Photography today is in a state of flux, to put it mildly, and I don't want to gloss over its greatest challenges. For all the technological wonders that make it potentially more likely for us to get a shot at 20, 30, 120 frames a second, I think we're at the mercy of an accelerating phenomenon, our ever shrinking attention span. So again, I'm grateful to have been initiated into the wonders of photography at a time when we could pick up a copy of Time, Life, and the other magazines that featured the amazing work of photographers like W. Eugene Smith, Andreas Fenninger, Ralph Morse, Carl Meidens, Alfred Eisenstadt, Gordon Parks. So many great eyes that helped teach mine. And I was so lucky to contemplate, and I mean that in the true sense, maybe meditate is the right word, on original works, most often made by the hand of those photographers in galleries from Vancouver to California. Technically, let's just say I was lucky beyond words to have learned photography with manual cameras, film, and darkroom processes. Lucky that my father was an enthusiast with an attic darkroom. I was lucky to live in Vancouver from the late 70s through the early 90s. That was a city that I documented as it began its transformation from a sleepy town to today's world-class eruption of glass towers and multi-million-dollar condos. That world-class label has brought world-class problems, from unaffordable housing, homelessness, gang violence, and a drug addiction crisis. So it might sound smug, but I'm grateful to have enjoyed what I think was the city's heyday. My love of nature was born in the fields that bordered the post-war English council housing estate I grew up in. I went birding along its hedgerows and remnant oak woods. Sitting in one of those great oaks, I had my first experience of what I might call self-awareness. That I existed on this mortal plane, that I was an individual being. Nothing could have prepared me for the experience of true wild nature that remains in North America. I'd never visited the wilder parts of Britain, but I mean the scale and the grandeur of the wilds of North America. I visited Alaska, Yukon, the length and breadth of British Columbia, and other provinces as far east as Ontario, climbed and cycled and kayaked and canoed, and of course made photos along the way. I wasn't too thrilled in my teens to be uprooted and become a stranger in a strange land. In fact, my school years in Canada were generally unpleasant, but I discovered the wonders of the wilderness here early on, and I was smitten. I'm so grateful for the fellow explorers I befriended, drawn together, I guess, by the mutual passion for the natural world. And it was among these fellow adventurers, really, that my photography habit became a passion and eventually a trade. I'm especially grateful to those people that I met in that orb of climbers, outdoor entrepreneurs, commercial artists, and so on, who took a chance on me and encouraged and gave me opportunities to make a living from my camera and sometimes my writing. I can't say if any of that would have come to pass back in England. I'll never know. And again, I'm so grateful that I was born where I was born, that I have the foundation of those early years in England. For sure, I would not be who I am without those formative experiences, and I'm quite happy with all of them, the negative and the positive. As an example, the last time I visited, my wife and I, my wife, a girl from southern England who I met in Canada, we were walking in an orchard in Kent, and it started to rain. The scents that arose from the ground, from the burdock and whatever other plants carpeted the fields, it took me back to childhood romps in the country. There's no organ like the nose, is there? Certainly not mine. To resurrect in the mind long-lost memories, and I began to cry. I'm thankful for that cathartic moment in that English orchard. It was melancholic and a treasure at the same time, a kind of aromatherapy that you can't buy in the health food store for sure. I guess I suffer from that affliction shared by the immigrant generally. It's a strange sort of homelessness, rootlessness. But I have to say I'm grateful for the perspective it's given me. I try to maintain that view, the view of the outsider, I guess it is. I still see much of my surroundings here as strange, sometimes even frightening. Even when I see things as banal, I try, though, to shake free of boredom and find the unusual, or maybe the sacred. I think I understand what Salvador Dali referred to as the paranoiac critical method. That idea, that approach, It's always fascinated me since I read of it in the book of his paintings and musings that I bought when I was like 19. Which reminds me that I'm grateful to all the teachers I've been so lucky to run into in my life, in books and in person. What a world of amazing people. Mountain hermits, trappers, prospectors, poets and writers and painters and sculptors and dancers and actors, explorers, scientists, all of them adventurers, really, of the human mind, human potential, creativity, so many beautiful, fearless souls. I want to thank them all, those who remain and those who have left to the world their timeless gifts. I'm so lucky and so incredibly grateful to all the physicians and surgeons who saved and extended my life, and grateful to those who've built this safety net that's it's actually now in crisis due to the negligence and corruption of political actors for whom I'm not so grateful. And I'm never more thankful and humbled by the dedication, the charity, and real humanity of the people I've been so lucky to have look after me. Those people are like living saints. The best of them literally cradle us in their arms, lift us up when we're low, and heal us when we're injured and ill. I literally would not be here rambling on about this and that without those selfless, caring people. I'm so lucky. I've lived through perhaps the heights of the age of photography. I was reminded in August, though I forgot to celebrate it here, by the World Photography Day, just how amazing this period has been. I have a collection of books dedicated to that celebration, to the history of this medium, and I'm genuinely amazed at the effect, the influence that photography's had on my life. Again, it hasn't all been a bed of roses or dandelion and burdock, maybe. There's been times when I questioned entirely my decision to turn my hobby into a job. One time, I peevishly told my friends to quit introducing me as Ray the photographer. I kind of slipped into a petulant and resentful relationship with my first love. But I didn't stay away long. A couple of months after that crisis, I was on a Greyhound bus heading for the huge commercial studios of Toronto. And I'm grateful for those years. Hey, it makes for a good story, I hope. Even if all the commercial crap I shot by day means nothing, again, I met some extraordinary mentors and friends, and made a few good street shots by night. I made a lot of money in those big city studios and squandered it in nightclubs, theaters, restaurants, and on film and processing, and my first trip back to England after 23 years. Last but not least, I'm eternally grateful for my partner of 33 years this month, my wife, Amanda, without whose rock-steady love and support over the years, I most definitely would not be here talking to you today. Believe it or not, after this long ramble, I'm actually lost for words to describe just how lucky that meeting was in 1989 at a Vancouver blues club. In the context of the posts I often read on photography forums and groups, guys, joking or not, about hiding their photo gear acquisitions from their significant others. A few months into our relationship, Amanda fronted the money for a new darkroom. That helped free me from the commercial lab I'd been slaving in since my return from Toronto. Well, I think I've rambled long enough. To those who've stuck this out to the end, thanks for listening. I'm grateful for your attention. If you like this video, please give it the old thumbs up. And if you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Cheers. We'll see you later.